Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot onto cold mosaic floors, beneath domes that seem to hum with secrets. The night air is thick with rosewater and anticipation, and the walls don't echo, they listen. You're not in your room anymore. You're in the harem of Topkapi Palace, where the most powerful man in the empire kept his deepest vulnerabilities locked behind velvet curtains, not with chains, with kisses, with whispers, with a gaze that lingered a second too long across a silk-covered shoulder. And before you even meet the Sultan, you'll feel it, how affection here was currency, sometimes punishment, and always performance. A kiss could kill. A glance could elevate you beyond your wildest dreams, or hurl you into a sack in the Bosphorus by morning. You probably won't survive this place, let's be honest. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're barefoot, padding softly over cool marble in a corridor lined with golden grills, every step muffled like the world itself is holding its breath. There's jasmine oil rubbed into the air. Somewhere nearby, someone is laughing, not loud, but like a secret is being peeled open. Ahead of you, a curtain shifts, not from wind. There's no wind in the palace's core, only movement made by breath, by intent, by desire. The women here don't speak your name, but they know your steps. You're the outsider. But for tonight, you're invited. There's no door into the garden of affection. That would be too easy. Instead, it begins with layers. First, the hall of the eunuchs, their black eyes unreadable beneath ceremonial robes. One of them nods. You're passed like a whisper. Then come the halls of education, where girls barely past puberty learn how to speak Ottoman poetry, prepare sherbet for seduction, and laugh at the right moment, not too loud, never too eager. Their beauty isn't the point, it's the ritual. The garden isn't a place, not really. It's a system, an organism. A heart beating behind the empire's ribs. The walls are painted with flowers. Not the shy, blooming kind. These are wild. Irises that lean like dancers. Tulips that bend unnaturally, like they're stretching to hear a secret you haven't been told yet. It's easy to forget that every single one of them is a prisoner. Even the favorites. Even the ones who win. Maybe especially them. You pause at a set of lattice windows. Behind them, light movement. Two shadows close. A giggle. Then a slap, sharp, then playful. Maybe not. You won't know. You were never meant to. Because the garden was as much about control as it was about affection. The Sultan's version of intimacy was complicated. At the height of the empire, the Sultan had hundreds of concubines, but only one would bear the heir. Or so people thought. The truth was stranger, more layered. The politics of sex in the Ottoman court were like a game of chess played on silk sheets. One wrong move and your entire lineage could be erased by morning. No ceremony. Just silence. Ask anyone who remembers Hafsa Hatton except. You can't. Her name was scratched out the record so hard it tore the parchment. The harem, in the popular imagination, is a place of idle pleasure. But here's a reality check. There were rules. For everything. You couldn't yawn too openly in front of a senior concubine. You couldn't wear a scent that outmatched the hierarchy. And you couldn't, under any circumstances, catch the Sultan's eye at the wrong time. Desire had a schedule. Love had a ledger. And yet underneath all the protocol, the harem pulsed with longing. Not just romantic longing, but the aching hunger for power, for escape, for a moment that felt unscripted. You meet a girl named Daria. She's been in the palace 3 years, trained in court etiquette and how to tilt her head so her jawline looks softer. She's never seen the sea, though her name means ocean. She tells you, in a whisper thin as thread, that the first time the Sultan touched her, she thought she was dying. Not from fear, from relief. I didn't exist until he looked at me, she says. That's how far identity here is shaped by desire. Terrifying, isn't it? The erotic isn't always physical. Sometimes it's the way a concubine kneels to. Pour coffee, her eyes never lifting from the rim of the cup. Sometimes it's the flash of an ankle on polished stone. Sometimes it's the risk of speaking too kindly to a fellow girl, because affection, even friendship, was currency. And the palace guards its money fiercely. Tonight, as you move deeper into the garden, the air changes, warmer, closer, like breath on your neck. You arrive at a chamber lit only by oil lamps shaped like peacocks. On a low divan reclines a woman wrapped in sheer amber silk. She isn't young, but her presence is gravitational. This is Gulbahar, once the favorite, now retired to luxury because she played the game too well to be disposed of. She beckons you without moving. Do you want to know what he whispered? She asks, not to me, to her. The one before me. She still hears it in her dreams. She tells you about a night decades ago, when the Sultan drank too much fig wine and made the mistake of confessing that he dreamed of being anonymous, that he once fell in love with a gardener's daughter. In disguise, and for a month, he believed she was mute. He thought her silence was wisdom, Gulbahar says. But she just didn't know Turkish. Historians still argue whether this story is true or crafted later to humanize a sultan known for cruelty. But Gulbahar's voice makes you believe it. And then she laughs low and almost cruel. Even the sultan, she says, couldn't escape the garden. He just thought he owned it. And that's when you realize something chilling. Affection wasn't offered here. It was harvested, like figs, like silk, like girls. That's what made it secret. Not that it was hidden, but that it was manufactured so perfectly you couldn't tell it wasn't real. Still with me? Good, because the garden has barely opened its gates. And the night has only just begun. You leave Gulbahar's chamber with your thoughts sticky as syrup, her laugh curling in your ears long after the door has closed. Down the corridor, your guide reappears, not a man, not exactly. His posture is perfect, the fabric of his robe so still it looks sculpted. This is the chief black eunuch, the most powerful man with no bloodline. His eyes pass over you like your paperwork. You can smell the clove oil he rubs into his skin to cover. The scent of fear, the fear of being neither fully accepted nor ever forgotten. He nods once, and you follow deeper into the harem's veins, the walls growing narrower, the silence growing louder. These corridors are not meant for drama. They are arteries designed to carry affection, suspicion, orders, and sometimes corpses, but mostly secrets. Secrets shaped like kisses, shaped like bruises hidden under bangles. The chief eunuch walks like he owns nothing and everything at once. He was taken from his home before his voice dropped. Castrated, trained, polished like an ivory chess piece, and placed beside power but never allowed to wield it for himself, at least not openly. And yet no one passed into the Sultan's embrace without his approval. They called him a gatekeeper, but he was a judge. He could end a girl's dream with a frown, or elevate her with a nod. Imagine the weight of that, carrying the keys to someone else's desires, but never your own. Historians still argue whether the eunuchs were complicit in the system or just another layer of its cruelty. But the truth, as always, lies somewhere in the sweat-stained middle. You arrive at the Hall of Mirrors. Not literal ones, these reflect nothing but intent. These are the courtyards where girls line up, dressed not in luxury, but in coded signals. Green for obedience, gold for musical skill, silver for poetic wit. The Sultan doesn't choose alone. His mood is read like the stars consulted by astrologers, interpreted by eunuchs, anticipated by the chief valid, the Sultan's mother, whose word can make or break a concubine's fate before her hips have even learned the rhythm of court life. You stand now in the selection chamber, where girls wait to be seen. Not touched, not yet, just seen. They stand in silence, eyes lowered, arms loose at their sides, taught to breathe evenly so their breasts don't rise too obviously. A flicker of impatience is a flaw. You see a girl blink too fast and the chief eunuch scribbles something on a slate. That girl will serve sherbet, not share a bed. One smile, 1 second too soon, and she's reassigned to laundry. They're not auditioning for love. They're surviving an audition for usefulness, for impression, for mystery. Because mystery is more valuable than beauty here. Beauty fades, but mystery sells. One girl catches your eye. She's older than the rest, maybe 20. Too old to be new, not old enough to be trusted. Her name is Lali. She was once the Sultan's favorite, for a month. Long enough to have her own chamber, her own servant, her own scent, a mix of sandalwood and lemon peel. But then one morning, her name wasn't on the visit list. No explanation, she didn't fall, she just stopped rising. Like a bubble that popped before reaching the surface. Layli tells you, under her breath, that the Sultan liked riddles. That she once whispered one in his ear, and he laughed so hard he choked on a pistachio. The next night, she waited, dressed in crimson silk. He didn't come. The next week, she was moved to the fringes. She doesn't know what changed. Maybe he solved her too quickly. Maybe she laughed too loud. In the harem, affection dies quietly. It doesn't scream. It just stops returning your glance. It's not all tension, though. Sometimes the girls sneak jokes in the baths, hide little love notes in the hems of each other's robes. You hear about a prank once pulled on a senior concubine involving a frog, a ribbon, and a very confused parrot. But those moments are brief. Laughter is a luxury. Most girls here don't last long enough to grow old. And the ones who do, their skin is parchment thin from the constant tension. Their smiles rehearsed into stillness. The chief eunuch leads you into a smaller room, low ceiling, dark wood, heavy with incense. Here is where the decisions happen. There's a ledger on the table. Names, notes, ages, skills, warnings. You see one marked with a red dot. Excellent voice, poor posture. Reprimanded twice for eye contact. Another has a gold star. Read to the Sultan from Saudi's Gulistan without trembling. That girl's fate is sealed and a good way for now. The eunuch doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. This is the bureaucracy of desire. A perfectly oiled machine where longing is sorted, filed, and served on command. And that's where it hits you. This isn't affection. This is administration. The Sultan's intimacy is managed like an empire. No wonder it breaks people. At dinner that night, you're invited to sit with one of the older women, Fatma Hatun, once a handmaiden, now keeper of harem etiquette. She feeds you little dried figs and slices of cheese cut into flowers. She tells you about a night the Sultan fell in love with a concubine who danced in a way no one had seen before. She danced like she was falling apart, Fatma says. Like she wanted to be devoured. For 3 nights, he summoned no one else. On the 4th night, she vanished. Fatma shrugs. Maybe he was afraid of what he felt. Or maybe she said something unscripted. That's all it took. Historians still argue whether that dancer ever existed. Some say she was a metaphor invented by a court poet. Others claim her name appears once in the kitchen rosters ordering cinnamon for a secret pudding recipe. You'll never know. That's the trick of the garden. Nothing is confirmed, but everything feels true. You fall asleep that night on silk sheets that smell like the past. Like rose, musk, and a sadness that doesn't speak. Somewhere in the harem, a girl laughs in her sleep. Somewhere else, a eunuch sharpens a quill. And the Sultan? He dreams of a silence that doesn't cost him anything. Morning arrives not with light, but with scent, jasmine, frankincense, and a trace of something sharper, like crushed mint underfoot. You're woken not by voices, but by movement. Whisper of bare feet on rugs, the gentle creak of wooden screens sliding open. The harem is already alive. And by alive, you don't mean bustling. You mean calculating. You rise into a world where affection is still currency, but now it's traded through glances exchanged during lessons, subtle gestures in calligraphy class, and that careful, casual way a concubine might adjust another's veil while slipping a message into her sleeve. Today is performance day. The Sultan, after days in consultation with advisors and governors and military men who pretend not to sweat in his presence, retreats to the garden of his mind, the place where politics end and the harem begins. But don't mistake this for indulgence. This is where politics wears perfume and dances barefoot on polished stone. This is where the real negotiations unfold, one soft laugh at a time. You're seated behind an ornate screen, allowed to observe, but not interfere. The chief eunuch stands beside you, arms folded, watching with the expression of a librarian who's seen too many pages torn. The Sultan arrives with no fanfare. He glides in, his robes whispering like papyrus, his face unreadable except for the twitch of amusement at the corners of his mouth. He's younger than you expected, sharper too, like a dagger disguised as a letter opener. You realize then that this man, cloaked in ceremony and expectation, is starving, not for flesh, for control, for mystery, for that rare, delicious sensation of surprise. Enter the concubines, not all of them. Just 5, selected for their skills, their silence, their mystery. Each one is a calculated offering. One plays the oud, her fingers so fluid you forget she's not speaking. Another dances, but not in the way of court-trained automatons. Her movement is erratic, stormy, like she's shaking off something invisible. A third girl sings in Persian, her voice rising like incense smoke, slow, deliberate, intoxicating. The fourth serves sherbet, that's all. No tricks, no performance. Just a single silver tray, a cup, and the quiet grace of a girl who has made herself invisible on purpose. The Sultan's eyes linger on her longest. The fifth offers poetry, not her own, but reimagined versions of Rumi, spoken in a way that suggests she's forgotten anyone else is listening. Her voice is soft, but her words bite. Even lovers lie, if the lie makes the silence sweeter. The room shifts. The Sultan doesn't move, but you sense something in him buckle. Not break, just buckle. Historians still argue whether this day marked the rise of Harem, the concubine who would one day dictate foreign policy through lullabies. Some say she never existed. Others say she was the ghostwriter of 3 imperial decrees, disguised in ink that smelled like rosewater. But today, she's just a girl with a voice that could haunt an empire. And the Sultan listens. He doesn't applaud. He doesn't smile. He simply nods once. And that's everything. You think it ends there, but no. Because now comes the selection. Ritual. Not the sexual one, though you can sense that's never far from the Sultan's mind, but the political one. Who stays? Who gets the amber oil tonight? Who returns to laundry? Who disappears? That last option is rare, but real. You remember one name, Yasmin, whispered only once. Too bold, too funny. She joked about the Grand Vizier's beard during a bathhouse story. She hasn't been seen since last spring. Her name has been scrubbed so clean, even the parrots in the harem's aviary don't mimic it anymore. The Sultan rises. He chooses no one. That's a choice too. He leaves with the air of a man who expected to be fed and walked away still hungry. The girls remain frozen until the chief eunuch exhales. Then they scatter graceful, quiet, but inwardly unraveling. In the harem, disappointment isn't a wound, it's a rehearsal. Back in the corridors you meet Ayla, the oud player. She plucks a string absent-mindedly, her fingers moving on autopilot. She tells you a secret. The Sultan never hears music. He listens to control, she says. How well we hold the rhythm. How we don't cry when a string breaks. Her string did break today. She smiled and kept playing. That's what caught his attention, she thinks. Or maybe it was nothing. Maybe today was one of those days when affection floats past you like a feather and lands on someone else's shoulder. Ayla used to be favored. 2 months ago, the Sultan gave her a gold hairpin, shaped like a crescent moon. She doesn't wear it anymore. I lost it, she says. You don't believe her. You hear about the pigeon girls next. Yes, pigeon girls. They raise and train birds for messages, entertainment, and sometimes coded warnings. The Sultan once had a concubine who taught her pigeon to land only on his shoulder. Historians still argue if she trained it with love or salted dates. Either way, it worked until the bird accidentally soiled the Grand Mufti's turban during prayer. The concubine disappeared. The pigeon lived on in the garden, but never flew again. You pass that garden now. It's not what you imagined. Not lush, not wild, controlled, clipped. The trees are trimmed into shaped stars, crescents, lions. The flowers bloom in order. Even nature submits here. The pigeons coo from above, but they sound nervous. You sit beneath a date tree and breathe. The scent of the day is different now, like overripe fruit and something metallic, like anticipation. You realize that in this garden, the most dangerous thing you can offer is sincerity. It's unpredictable, unrehearsed, and the Sultan, for all his power, fears unpredictability most. A soft cough behind you. It's the poetry girl. She sits beside you without asking. Her name is not Scheherazade. That was someone else. Maybe. She tells you that when she writes, she hides her real lines She hides her real lines behind metaphors. If they understand too quickly, she says, you're punished for clarity. But if they never understand, you're forgotten. You ask her if the Sultan really listens. She smiles. He listens for what he wants to hear. And what if you give him something else? Her smile fades. Then he forgets you on purpose. She rises, adjusts her sash, and disappears into the corridor's shade. You remain seated, feeling the air shift around you, as if the walls themselves have overheard too much. Tonight, the Sultan won't choose. But the garden remembers. It always remembers. You hear her before you see her, a laugh. Not loud, but shaped like a secret floating from behind a lattice screen, where shadows dance in candlelight, like gossip given form. That laugh is a hook, a thread that tugs you. Down a side corridor the guides don't mention, where the air is thicker, where the stone floor warms beneath your steps like it's been waiting. You reach a door with no handle, only a carved rose. It opens. Not to you. It opens because she wants it to. You step inside the bathhouse, and the world melts. Everything is soft here. The steam hangs like silk in the air. The walls gleam with tiles painted in blues so deep they hum. Women move through the mist like ghosts with perfect posture. There is no noise, only water dripping, and the occasional splash, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Welcome to the whisper circuit, where affection is boiled down, rinsed clean, and retold. In safer, slipperier versions. Here, gossip isn't idle, it's currency, even prophecy. You see girls lathering each other's backs with rose soap while exchanging intel on who's rising in favor, who smiled at the wrong time, who was seen weeping. Behind the cedar partition. This is where futures are revised in whispers that never make it to the ledger. And in the center of it all reclines Hemera. You don't need anyone to point her out. She's the epicenter. She wears no jewels. Her robe is the same as the others. But everyone else glances toward her before they speak, as if measuring their words against her silence. They say she once turned down the Sultan 3 nights in a row and lived. Either that's proof of her influence, or proof that she knows things too precious to spill. You watch her rinse her hands in a marble basin, carved to look like open palms, and she calls you forward with a single lift of her eyebrow. She doesn't ask your name. Instead, she tells you a story. A true one, if her eyes are to be believed. About a concubine who faked her virginity by using sheep's blood, soaked into a tiny sponge hidden in a cinnamon stick. Worked like a charm, Hamera says, until it slipped out. You try not to laugh. She lets the silence linger. Then she continues. The Sultan never punished her. He was fascinated. Asked her to show him how she did it. Next night, she taught him stagecraft. That woman? She's gone now. Maybe promoted, maybe vanished. Hamera doesn't say. But she leans in and murmurs, "That girl was me." She sits back, smiles. A joke? A confession? You'll never know. That's the beauty of the bathhouse. It's all foam and fog and carefully incomplete memories. You hear another tale, passed like a bar of soap between bodies. About a night the Sultan summoned 2 concubines at once unusual, risky, and rumored to be politically motivated. They arrived to find not a man, but a tableau. Fruit arranged to resemble a battlefield. A single line of pomegranate seeds dividing figs and peaches, with a dagger stuck through the middle. He said nothing, just watched as they interpreted the scene. One began rearranging the fruit into a spiral. The other sat and wept. Guess who became a favorite? Neither. He summoned a musician instead. Historians still argue what the display meant. Some say it was a metaphor for the Safavid conflict. Others think it was performance art designed to destabilize the concubine's sense of control. Or maybe he was just bored. A sultan's affection is often indistinguishable from experimentation. In one corner of the bathhouse, a girl scrubs the floor with orange peel. Her name is Essel. She was once a rising poet, but one of her metaphors cut too close to a recent execution. Now she cleans tiles and recites her verses only to herself. You lean in to hear one. The jasmine forgets its scent in captivity, she whispers. Then she smiles, bitter and bright. But the lemon always remembers. You want to ask her what that means, but she's already moved on, scrubbing with a rhythm that sounds like the tick of a clock counting down the days she has left to be noticed again. The bathhouse isn't just a place to relax, it's a stage for strategic vulnerability. You see a concubine twist her ankle slightly as she rises. Another rushes to help her. Later, you hear that the helper was promoted to chamber assistant. Kindness is dangerous here. It either costs you or saves you. Never both. In the corner, you spot a girl with henna-stained fingertips and a sly grin. She's painting patterns on another girl's back, delicate, dizzying spirals that seem to shimmer even in the fog. She says each design is based on a lover's story. This one, she says, tracing a line, was for a prince who kissed like a question. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. Her name is Nesrin. She once created a scent that made the Sultan nostalgic for a mother he barely remembered. For 3 nights, he wore it on his wrists and summoned no one. On the 4th, he called her and asked her to burn the recipe. She did, but not before tattooing the ingredients in a code only she understands. You ask her why. She shrugs. Even emperors forget. I prefer they owe. She glides away, the scent of cloves and plum trailing behind her. Then the bell. The faint chime that signals the bath session's end. The fog thins as if scared of the sound. Girls rise, collect their robes, their masks of composure. You watch them transform back into concubines, perfect posture, softened eyes, steps measured like poetry. The bathhouse is behind them now, but its stories follow them like steam clinging to skin. As you leave, Hamera calls out, "Tell me." She says, "What do you smell on your skin?" You pause. You smell rose, yes, lemon, a trace of sweat. And something else, something like longing. She smiles. Good, then you've been listening. She turns and disappears behind the steam. The chief eunuch waits at the entrance. Did you learn anything useful? He asks without looking at you. You want to say yes. You want to say everything. But the truth is, in the garden of affection, truth is just another layer of steam seen, felt, but never quite held. You're led from the bathhouse with skin warm and thoughts tangled. The air outside suddenly too cold, too dry, like the world forgot how to feel. But the garden doesn't pause for reflection. No one gets to linger, because now comes dessert. Not the kind you eat with your mouth, though there's plenty of that, too, but the kind that coats the throat of affection, with sweetness before the blade. You're taken through the sweets hall, a domed chamber where syrup is a language and candied almonds are political statements. A place where the Sultan's cravings are not culinary, they are coded, wrapped in rose petal jam and buried under pomegranate molasses. You step past platters of sugar-dusted lokum, trays of jewel-toned preserves, and towers of golden baklava so delicate it might shatter under the weight of a compliment. And every one of them has been touched by hands that were trained to seduce, without ever speaking. That's when you meet Leela, the Sultan's former confectioner turned concubine turned question mark. She sits in a sunbeam slicing apricots into thin curls, her knife movements hypnotic, surgical, reverent. She doesn't look up as she speaks. He used to eat my sweets with his eyes closed. Said they reminded him of the orchard he wasn't allowed to visit as a child. You ask why he wasn't allowed. She smiles. Too many bees. Too many chances to get stung. That's how affection worked here, risk wrapped in sugar. You don't just feed the Sultan. You feed his memories, his regrets, his need to believe that every bite is new, even if it tastes exactly like the last one. Layla shows you her private stash. Candied violets, figs soaked in rose water, cinnamon-coated walnuts shaped like hearts. Not metaphorical ones, literal. Tiny walnut hearts, carved with a blade made of glass. She holds one out. He used to give these to the girls he liked most. The real ones, I mean. The ones who listened when he didn't speak. She lets you eat it. It tastes like honey and longing. She tells you a story then, almost casually, about the time she was asked to bake a cake laced with a precise dosage of opium, not to kill, just to blur. The Sultan wanted to forget something, and so she crafted a dream out of flour and flowers. He slept for 12 hours. Woke up with tears in his beard, never explained why. Historians still argue what he was trying to forget. A lost brother? A failed treaty? A favorite who said the wrong name in bed? No one knows, but Leela remembers. He thanked me without looking at me, she says. That's when I knew I was finished. She went from serving desserts to washing linens within a week. Sugar to sweat. All because she fed him too well. You move through the hall where girls are trained in the art of edible affection. One practices slicing quince with a flick of the wrist, so fast it looks like dance. Another learns how to fold marzipan into flowers that melt just enough when kissed. There's a girl reciting poetry while stirring thick syrup, the words matching the rhythm of the spoon, every line sweeter than the last. One phrase catches your ear. Love is a bowl that overflows only when untouched. You repeat it under your breath. It sticks to your tongue. You meet Farida, who once turned down the Sultan's request for a midnight snack. Not rudely, just with a smile and a riddle. What fills the belly but empties the bed? He couldn't answer. She wasn't summoned again for 6 months. When she finally was, he didn't speak. Just stared at her, then dismissed her with a wave. Farida shrugs. He hated being denied, but he respected it more than he admitted. She hands you a jar of something murky and golden. Apricot preserve, she says, spiked with lemon and rose vinegar. It reminds you that sweetness should have a sting. You take a spoonful. Your mouth floods with contradictions. You begin to understand that nothing in the garden is ever just one flavor. It's always layered like a pudding where each bite is a different memory. Sweet, then bitter, then sweet again, but never the same. In a far corner, behind a curtain of silk veils, is the poisoner's alcove. That's not its official name, of course. It's called the tasting room, but everyone knows what it is. Here, the royal tasters sample every dish, every sweet, every glass of sherbet before it touches royal lips. You meet Melik, a boy barely 16, who's already tasted death twice. Not enough to kill, just enough to remember. You get used to the taste, he says. Like sucking on coins. He tells you about a concubine named Soraya, who used to lace her fingertips with clove oil and arsenic. Just enough to numb. Just enough to tingle. She claimed it was a perfume. Then one night, the Sultan kissed her hand and vomited until dawn. She vanished the next day. Her chamber was sealed. Her books burned. Her name erased from the visitor logs. And yet Melik remembers her. She used to hum while she peeled oranges, he says. Like she wasn't scared of anything. You realize now that in this garden, affection and danger are served on the same platter. You can't always tell which is which. Even the Sultan, especially the Sultan, sometimes forgets. As you leave the hall, your stomach is full, but your chest is tight. You've tasted longing, bitterness, power disguised as pudding, and something. Stranger affection made edible. The eunuch guiding you asks if you'd like a sherbet for the road. You decline. You're not sure if your tongue can take another lie. Outside, the sun is lower now, casting gold across the tiled courtyards. The garden hums with new energy. Someone is laughing in the distance, not joyfully, strategically. And the Sultan? He sits alone in his private chamber, staring into a bowl of syrup, trying to remember if this sweetness tastes like love or poison. You'd think by now the Sultan's affections would have rules, some pattern to follow, a rhythm in the chaos, but no. Tonight the only choreography is danger. Tonight, the concubines perform, not in a theater, not on a stage. They perform in the Red Pavilion, a space so private most of the palace staff don't even know it exists. You're led there through a winding tunnel lit by lanterns shaped like open eyes. The symbolism is not subtle. The Sultan sees all, or at least he wants you to believe he does. The air shifts as you enter. It's heavier, perfumed with musk and oud. But underneath, it is the unmistakable scent of tension, sweet, metallic, and old. Like the scent of a blade that hasn't drawn blood in years, but remembers how. The room is velvet and shadow, its walls draped in crimson so deep it absorbs light. No mirrors here. Nothing to bounce back the truth. Only the Sultan's couch, raised on a dais, surrounded by cushions like it's been built for a man drowning in softness. He reclines with the casual boredom of someone who's seen too much beauty and not enough surprise. You take a seat in a small alcove, just close enough to hear him breathe, not close enough to be noticed. The first dancer enters. She's tall, draped in translucent layers that billow like smoke. Her hands hold twin fans embroidered with tiny silver daggers. They flash when she spins. This is not coincidence. The dance begins slowly, a series of measured steps that mimic heartbeat, grief, seduction, and maybe strategy. She dances like she's offering a prayer and a warning in the same breath. It's hypnotic. The Sultan watches, his face unreadable, until she drops one fan. On purpose. It skids across the floor to his feet. He doesn't blink, doesn't pick it up. The dancer freezes for half a second, bows and exits. No applause. The next performer is younger, bolder. She sings as she dances, her voice barely above a whisper, telling the story of a girl who fell in love with a shadow that only visited at night. The shadow taught her how to disappear. The story ends with her fading so completely, no one remembers her name. She twirls and vanishes behind a curtain before you can decide if that was art or autobiography. Historians still argue whether these performances were spontaneous or rehearsed with military precision. Some believe the girls were coached by the valid Sultan herself, each movement vetted for subtext. Others argue they had full creative license, that the Sultan craved real emotion more than perfect execution. But when perfection is the baseline, even vulnerability has to be stylized. The third dancer is Ruya. You've heard her name already. spoken in fragments in the bathhouse, traced into flour in the kitchen. She enters barefoot, hair unbound, eyes locked on the Sultan's. There's no music. She doesn't need any. Her body is rhythm. Her gaze is a metronome. She moves with no fear of consequence, no fear of being forgotten. Every step is intimate, like she's dancing only for one heartbeat his. You notice his breath catch. Just once, that's all it takes. She ends the dance by sitting on the floor, not in supplication, but in invitation. The room holds its breath. The Sultan smiles. It's not a wide smile. It's not even kind. It's the kind of smile you give when someone plays your favorite song in a different key, and you realize you've never really heard it before. He gestures. She rises and walks out without looking back. He doesn't follow. But you can feel the room has changed. The others feel it too. The fourth girl never dances. She simply speaks. She tells a parable of two birds, one in a cage, the other free. They fall in love but can never meet. So the caged one sings, and the free one learns to mimic its song. Until one day, the free bird enters the cage on purpose. To be near, she says, is worth the loss of flight. The Sultan stares at her for a long time. Says nothing. She bows, leaves. The last performance is unlike anything else. A girl named Maliki presents a tapestry she embroidered by hand. It shows the palace, but from above as if seen by a bird or a god. Every tower, every chamber, even the secret tunnel to the red pavilion, stitched in silver thread dot at the center. She's embroidered herself, tiny but unmistakable, in the Sultan's chamber. Alone, smiling. It's bold. It's dangerous. It's perfect. The Sultan stands, walks to the tapestry, touches the tiny silver thread with a finger that trembles for less than a second, then turns, leaves the room. Everyone freezes. The eunuchs exchange glances. You're escorted out before anyone speaks. The message is clear. He was moved, maybe, or he's furious, maybe, or maybe he just remembered someone else. That's the nature of affection here. You never know when it's about you or a memory wearing your face. Later that night, you find Ruya sitting on the edge of a fountain, her feet in the water. She doesn't look surprised to see you. He won't call me, she says. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You ask why. Because I didn't leave him a question. Only a reflection. You ask if she regrets it. She laughs. You don't dance for the Sultan. You dance for the room that remembers. She flicks water at you with her toes. And you're going to remember me, aren't you? You don't answer. You don't need to. The water ripples. Somewhere in the palace, a pageboy lights a candle. Somewhere else, a concubine rewrites her routine. And in the garden of affection, a performance isn't just art. It's survival dressed in sequins. It's longing choreographed into muscle. Memory. It's a scream you whisper with your body, hoping someone, anyone, is still listening. The room is dim and smells faintly of old ink, sweat, and pomegranate oil. And for a moment, you think you've walked into a scholar's cell. But then you see it, the pile of torn silks in the corner, the velvet-bound book with a cracked spine. The candle burned low, not for light but for mood. You've just stepped into one of the Sultan's most dangerous indulgences. Not a woman, not a weapon, but a poem. This chamber, hidden deep beneath the Imperial Library, is the place where passion turns into verse, where power is bled into ink, and where the Sultan writes not as ruler, but as man. Tonight, you discover the love letters he never sent. They are not addressed, not dated. Just page after page of yearning disguised as metaphor, of control disguised as stanza. The walls are lined with writing desks, some dusty, some still warm, and each one tells a story. A concubine who translated Persian ghazals so perfectly the Sultan wept. A eunuch who inked forbidden Greek erotica between pages of religious commentary. A scribe who committed suicide after being ordered to burn a collection of poetry too dangerous to survive a jealous glance. The Sultan was not a good man, but he was a great writer. And in this room, he didn't rule. He ached. You read one of his verses out loud, your voice catching. I touched her hand and time folded, like prayer, like punishment, like the last breath before sleep. The air shifts. Someone behind you inhales. You turn. A girl leans against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smudge of ink on her lip. Her name is Zeynep, and she's not here to dance or pour tea. She's here to edit. She corrects your pronunciation with a sigh, then gestures for you to move aside. He means punishment as in pleasure, she says. It's coded. You ask how she knows. She raises one brow. Because I wrote it. She walks past you and flips open another book, this one scribbled with notes in 3 languages. He dictated, I translated. Then I added a few lines. You point out the danger. She shrugs. The Sultan's pride is thick, but not thicker than his need to be understood. She sits down and begins to write, whispering the words as she goes, her ink-stained fingers moving like they remember every touch they've ever been denied. You glance around and realize this room isn't just for writing, it's for forgetting. For pretending that words can control what bodies can't. There's a drawer nearby, left slightly ajar. Inside, sealed letters never delivered, poems. Stitched onto scraps of silk, even a wooden box of scented paper, each infused with a different emotion. The red one smells like jealousy, the blue like nostalgia. The green, you're afraid to find out. Zeynep tells you about a concubine named Elif, who once wrote a poem so beautiful. The Sultan ordered it etched into a gold plate. Then he found out she'd copied it from a Sufi mystic. He melted the plate, made her watch. But the plate didn't disappear. It was reshaped into the base of a perfume bottle. And every girl who enters the Sultan's chamber now sets that bottle on the windowsill without knowing its past. That's what affection becomes in the garden, recycled grief, polished into ritual. Zeynep tosses you a journal. Write something, she says. Doesn't have to be true, just has to feel true. You hesitate, then scribble. I kissed the thought of you, and it bruised my mouth. She nods. Better than most of what's in here. You don't know whether to feel proud or terrified. In a corner of the room, you find a different kind of writing, charms, symbols, pictograms etched into the walls behind a curtain. These are the erotic diagrams, the Ottoman sex manuals passed secretly among the women, drawn in code and preserved by those who refuse to forget the science of pleasure. One shows a lotus unfolding. Another depicts a man and woman entwined. Not crudely, but almost mathematically, each touch is labeled, each curve defined. This isn't filth, this is anatomy. And ambition. Because pleasure, in this palace, is power you can't trace on a family tree. The diagrams come from older texts, some smuggled from India, others translated from Arabic volumes the imams tried to destroy. You see marginal notes in different hands, girls leaving each other tips, warnings, even jokes. One note says, try. Position 9 after pomegranate sherbet, trust me. Another, this only works if he's not distracted by empire. You laugh and Zeynep glances over. They weren't just lovers, she says. They were archivists of longing. You ask if the Sultan ever saw these. She nods. He approved some, banned others. Depends on his mood. Or his mother's. That last part lands heavy. Because behind every poem, every diagram, every confession, there's the valid Sultan pulling strings, burning pages, editing affection like a playwright with a sharp knife. You ask Zeynep why she stays. Why risk so much just to ghostwrite a man's fantasies? She doesn't answer for a long time. Then, because when I write, I'm not in the garden. I'm not being watched. I'm not being touched. I'm touching. Back. You leave her there, hunched over her manuscript, lit by the flicker of a single flame. The Sultan won't read those words tonight, but he will smell the ink on Zeynep's fingers. And maybe that will be enough. Outside the chamber, the halls feel quieter, like the walls have been listening, like your own thoughts are echoing back at you in verse. You remember a line from one of the Sultan's hidden poems. Affection is a dagger with a ribbon tied around the hilt. And you wonder how many of the girls in this palace have learned to pull that blade out of themselves and use it. 1. Last note catches your eye before you leave, a scrap of silk pinned to the doorway. A single line, embroidered in gold. To be desired is to be written. You run your fingers across it. The thread is warm. You wake to the sound of slippers scraping stone and muffled sobbing. The kind someone's trying not to make audible. You don't need to ask who it is, you already know. Her name is Safi, and last night she was radiant. Dressed in blue silk that shimmered like moonlight on water, hair laced with silver threads. She had been certain that tonight would be hers. The Sultan had looked at her during the poetry reading. Not long, not dramatically. But it was enough. Enough for hope to take root in her chest like ivy, beautiful, twisting, slowly tightening. But he didn't call for her. He called for someone else. And now she's unraveling. You follow her down a side hallway, one lined with paintings of tulips that don't quite match their colors, too dark. Their petals slightly off, like someone tried to remember them from memory and got just close enough to make it haunting. Safi stops at a fountain and plunges her hands into the water, scrubbing her arms like she's trying to erase last night. You sit nearby. She doesn't ask you to leave. Do you know what it feels like to be almost chosen? She asks, voice flat, to walk around glowing for hours, only to realize the glow came from a fire behind you? You don't answer. What could you say? She continues anyway. I told my chamber girl to prepare everything. My perfume, my jewelry, the story I would tell him if he asked about my dreams. And then ... nothing. He picked ache. She has freckles. He said once he doesn't like freckles. You want to say that maybe it wasn't personal. But you know better. In the garden, everything is personal. Even when it's not. Especially when it's not. You remember Golbahar's warning, affection here isn't something you fall into. It's something you're constructed for. And sometimes, the construction fails. Safi leans forward and begins picking at a crack in the fountain's edge, flaking off bits of stone like she's looking for something underneath. You know what the real horror is? She whispers. It's not that he didn't choose me. It's that I still want him to. That's the wound no silk can wrap. Wanting the man who didn't want you. Not just because he's a sultan, but because he's the only mirror you're allowed to see yourself in. Safi's story is not unique. The garden is full of meteoric rises and crashes so silent you don't notice until the girl is gone. One day she's draped in gold. The next she's folding towels, and no one speaks her name because that's how you keep yourself safe. But there are exceptions. Girls who rose so fast, the air never caught up to them. Like Mahid Vevran. Remember her name. She came from the Balkans, arrived in the palace barely speaking the language. With hair so black, the eunuchs called her ink. She wasn't the most beautiful, not at first glance. But there was something in her laugh, unapologetic, sharp-edged, like she didn't need the garden to validate her. Within months, she was in the Sultan's bed. Within a year, she had a son. And not just any son, one whose face made the Sultan forget his other children. That's when it started. The ascent. She was given her own chamber, her own seal, her own servants. The other girls hated her, of course. But not just because she rose, because she made no effort to soften it. She didn't play humble. She didn't feign gratitude. She ruled her corner of the harem like she was born for it. Until the Sultan fell in love again, not with a new concubine, with an idea. A gentler, more malleable affection, one that didn't argue, one that cried on cue. Enter Harem, soft eyes, sharpened soul. The perfect opposite to Mahidevran's fire. And just like that, Mahidevran's star began to dim, not all at once, but slowly, like a candle in a room with too many windows. She didn't go quietly. She pushed back, slapped a servant, threatened to poison Harem's tea. The palace records say she was reassigned, which means they gave her a title, a stipend, and a mansion far away from the garden, far enough that she couldn't be heard when she screamed. Historians still argue whether Mahid Vevran was truly a villain, or just a woman who refused to smile while being erased. But in the quiet corners of the garden, her name is still whispered less. Like a curse, more like a dare. Safi knows this story. All the girls do. It's not history here, it's prophecy. You either fade or you fracture, she says finally, standing up, wiping her eyes. I'm not fading. That afternoon, you see her again. She's practicing. A new dance, one that doesn't invite, one that warns. A blend of Balkan footwork and Ottoman grace. It's too fast, too angular, too dangerous. It's not seductive, it's defiant. And you realize she's not dancing for the Sultan anymore. She's dancing for the girls watching her. Sending a message. I may not be chosen, but I won't be forgotten. Later, a fringe story finds its way to your ears. About a concubine centuries ago who snuck messages to a Venetian diplomat using embroidery patterns. Each stitch was a letter, each flower a sentence. She was executed when the pattern spelled out the word help. The diplomat claimed he never noticed. But in his diary, found decades later, he wrote, "Her hands never shook." You wonder how many others left their truth stitched into. Curtains whispered into pillow seams, painted into flower petals, because the garden forgets no one. It just hides the memory behind veils. You pass Safi one last time as the moon rises. She nods at you, not with friendship, but recognition. Like you've both seen something unspoken. She adjusts her sash, walks into the practice room like a girl preparing for war. And maybe she is. Because in the garden of affection, the battlefield has no borders, the weapons wear perfume, and every glance is a gamble. There's a quiet revolution happening in the corner room with the broken mosaic floor. The one they don't show to foreign guests, where the tiles curl like old paper and the ceiling leaks during spring rains. This is where the women plot not rebellions of swords or banners, but the kind that unfurl in whispers, in altered bedtime rituals, in the way a girl chooses not to smile at a certain joke. The garden, after all, was never about silence. It was about strategic soundlessness. Tonight, you enter the room with a bowl of dates in your hands and find 3 women seated in a loose circle. One embroiders in tight, angry stitches. One is writing something invisible on her palm with the tip of a charred stick. The third oldest, and clearly the one they defer to, just watches. Her name is Halim, and she's the closest thing the harem has to a philosopher. Once a concubine, once a favorite, once the tutor of a prince who died too young to inherit anything but a page in court history. She now carries the weight of survival with the grace of someone who's learned how to weaponize memory. You think affection is a reward, she says without looking up. But here, it's a test. Every kiss is surveillance. Every embrace is a report card. The girl writing on her palm scoffs. Her name is Daria, and she's newer, sharper, hungrier. What else are we supposed to do? Fold towels and hope the right scent floats past his chamber? Halim smiles, not unkindly. You play the game, yes, but you play it sideways. And then she tells you a story. It starts with a comb. Just an ordinary ivory comb, carved with little tulips. It was passed hand to hand, girl to girl. Each time it changed hands, the owner added a mark scratched into the back. A dash, a circle, a symbol only the women understood. It was a chain of memory, and every girl who touched it knew what it meant. Someone came before you. Someone will come after. You are not alone. Until one day, the comb went missing. Halim doesn't say who took it, but her eyes say everything. You begin to understand that affection here doesn't just flow upward toward the Sultan. It loops sideways between women. Shared recipes, braided hair, notes left under pillows. A hand held too long during a massage. These are soft rebellions. Affection stolen back from the empire that tried to own them. One fringe story floats to the surface, a tale of two concubines who fell in love, quietly, in between dance rehearsals and poetry recitations. They never kissed in daylight, never touched beyond what protocol allowed. But one night, they carved each other's initials into the underside of the cedar water bucket in the bathhouse. No one ever noticed, until decades later when the bucket was replaced and a eunuch found the letters. He didn't report it. He just stared at them for a long time, then threw the bucket into the garden well. Sometimes even the guards guard things they're not supposed to. Historians still argue whether there were truly romantic relationships between concubines, or whether such tales were later embellishments. But every time you walk past a chamber and hear two girls laughing softly, you believe it a little more. In this room, Halim shows you the Book of Hours, not a timepiece, but a rotating journal passed between trusted women in the harem. No one signs their name. Every entry begins with she and ends with ... until morning. One entry reads, "She kissed the back of my neck as I adjusted her robe, and for a moment I forgot the difference between power and protection ... until morning." Another, "She taught me how to braid my hair so that it looked accidental. Then she whispered that nothing in this palace ever is ... until morning." The book is hidden behind a loose tile, guarded by silence and a promise. Made in oil and thread, Daria reads a passage aloud. Her voice doesn't crack, but it hovers. You realize then that she's not new to this, just new to being believed. Halim watches you both. "We are trained to be soft. But softness," she says, "can crush things too. Ever slept under a wet quilt?" You laugh, a little too loudly. She doesn't. She's right. Affection can smother just as well as it can warm. You ask what happens when the Sultan suspects. These side alliances, Halim pauses. He doesn't, not really. The idea threatens him, so he edits it out. And then she tells you about a concubine named Nalan, who became the Sultan's favorite, not through seduction, but by pretending to be broken. She spoke little, slept late, cried quietly. The Sultan, drawn to the illusion of healing someone, kept her close for months. Then one night, she slipped a coded poem into his robe. It spoke not of him, but of another girl. A girl who brushed her hair at night, who sang to her when the palace walls pressed in too tightly. The Sultan never confronted her, but he stopped visiting. A week later, Nalan was reassigned to the garden archives. A demotion in name only, because it gave her access. And over the years, she altered records, added stories, hid names in footnotes. Today, some of the most poignant accounts of harem life are believed to be touched by her hand. Affection didn't save her, Halim says, but it gave her something bigger than survival. It gave her a voice. You sit with that. The idea that love here isn't just about being seen. It's about making sure someone, somewhere, sees you long after you're gone. Before you leave, Daria hands you a square of fabric embroidered with a single word. Yeren. Tomorrow. You don't ask what it means. You already know. It's not hope. It's defiance. It's affection redefined, not as submission, but as solidarity. You step back into the hallway and realize the light feels different. Not brighter, just ... more complicated. Somewhere down the corridor, someone is laughing again. But this time, the sound feels like resistance. There is a boy in the palace who doesn't know what the outside world smells like. He's never seen the Bosphorus, never touched the bark of a tree not planted inside court walls. His name is Mustafa, and he is the Sultan's son. But don't let that fool you. Being born of royal affection here doesn't mean you are kissed more. It means you are watched more closely. Tonight, you are brought to his chamber, which is not a boy's room. and not yet a prison. It is a transition opulently decorated with carved ivory toys no one is allowed to play with and paintings of gardens he will never walk in without. 100 eyes tracking each step. Mustafa sits on a divan, wrapped in layers too heavy for a child, holding a mechanical bird that clicks and flaps but cannot fly. His nurse, Aten, stands nearby. You think she is only a servant, until you see the way she holds his gaze, the way he doesn't flinch when she brushes his curls behind his ear. Her affection is not performative. It is feral, protective. He had a nightmare again, she says, not looking at you, about the mirror hallway. Mustafa turns his head, eyes wide. There were 2 of me, he whispers. And only one of her. You don't ask who her is. You don't have to. In the harem, affection doesn't age with you. It either calcifies into discipline or evaporates into longing. Mustafa is too young to understand politics, but he already knows what silence costs. His days are structured. Lessons in Arabic, Ottoman Turkish, Persian, mathematics, and poetry. Not just for knowledge, but to create a mind too busy to notice its confinement. His afternoons are spent with shadows eunuchs who speak only when needed, tutors who never touch. Except Aten. She sings lullabies from a region she won't name, tunes that were never part of the palace-approved repertoire. They are off-key, slightly sad, the kind of songs that children remember long after they forget the words. She tells you that Mustafa was born during a comet, that the astrologers nearly fought over its interpretation. Some called it a sign of greatness. Others warned of blood. The Sultan chose to believe both. That's why Mustafa was raised not in celebration, but in control. His toys are maps. His lullabies end with caution. His dreams are monitored, and his contact with his mother is limited. Not because she's unfit, but because she once loved. The Sultan too openly, too sincerely. And the Valid didn't like the look in her eyes when she watched her son sleep. There's a story Aten tells you, after checking that no one else is near, about a prince who grew up in this very room too. Generations ago. He learned affection through mirrors, watched concubines through the polished silver screens, learned how they moved, how they smiled when they thought no one watched. By 12, he was mimicking their laughter. By 15, he was caught kissing. His music tutor, he was sent to the provinces. Died of fever 3 months later. His portrait was burned. Except Aten saw the original once, rolled up behind a cabinet. He had kind eyes, she says. You could see he didn't belong to this place. And that's why it broke him. Mustafa doesn't speak while she tells the story, but he hums that same off-key tune. A defense mechanism, a tether. Later, he shows you his drawings chalk smudges of people with exaggerated eyes and missing mouths, so they can't tell secrets, he explains. Only keep them. You ask him if he's ever left the harem. He nods, once, to see the turtles. There's a garden at the far end of the palace where turtles roam among lanterns. They carry candles on their backs during festivals. The symbolism is clear light that moves slowly, too burdened to rise. Mustafa saw them once and asked why they never stop walking. Aten told him, because they think they're going somewhere. He hasn't asked to see them again. You realize that even affection, when confined, begins to fold inward. For these boys, love isn't soft. It's sharp. A reminder of what they must be worthy of. Aten has stitched charms into Mustafa's robe's hidden symbols from her homeland. Protection spells disguised as embroidery. If the Valid finds them, Aten will be reassigned, or worse. But she does it anyway. Because here, that's what affection means, not comfort, but risk. She tells you of a prince who used to sneak into the kitchens just to hear laughter, who fell in love with a pastry girl after she gave him a burnt almond and didn't apologize, who wrote poems about her and hid them inside bread rolls. When the Sultan found out, he banned poetry from the boys' curriculum. That boy now governs a distant city, married a foreign princess. But 810 once heard that he keeps a burnt almond in his study. And sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching, he talks to it. Affection leaves residue, even in exile. You ask her why the Sultan allows his sons to be raised in such gilded cages. She looks at you, eyes dark, because love makes them weak. And weak princes make dead sultans. You don't know whether that's truth or prophecy. Maybe both. Before you leave, Mustafa hands you a folded note. Inside is a drawing of a turtle wearing a crown. It's smiling. That one's happy, he says, because no one's writing it. You smile, but your throat tightens. He's only 8. And already he understands metaphor better than most adults. That night, as you walk past the turtle garden, the candles flicker on their armored backs. They move in slow, stubborn lines, never veering, never stopping. And somewhere in the palace, a boy dreams not of ruling, but of freedom he doesn't yet have the words for, somewhere between the water clocks and the prayer towers, between the bathhouse whispers and the midnight. Silk, a quiet obsession, pulses through the veins of the palace like a second heartbeat. Lineage. The Garden of Affection was never really about romance. It was about bloodlines arranged like architecture, about folding human lives into family trees like origami, so intricate even the wind couldn't touch it without tearing. You're led now to the genealogy chamber, a vaulted room thick with parchment and the slow ache of decisions that outlived the people who made them. There's no music here, no perfume, just scrolls, hundreds of them, inked by trembling hands over generations. Each scroll a story, but not the romantic kind. These are transactional tales. Who bore whom, when, under what conditions. Whether the child cried too much or not enough. Whether the mother was rewarded with a bracelet or a warning. You walk past shelves of name after name, many of them crossed out, not because they died, but because they became inconvenient. You learn quickly that a concubine's true purpose was not to charm the Sultan, but to produce heirs. Preferably male, preferably quiet, preferably just enough to keep the dynasty strong, but not so many that succession became a bloodbath. Of course, it still did. Often, you hear the story of Qazaid Ahmed, son of a concubine, who once told the Sultan, "If you give me a child, I'll give you eternity." It sounded poetic, until she died in childbirth, and the boy grew up so obsessed with preserving his mother's memory that he refused to marry anyone who didn't look like her. That boy became a man. That man became a sultan. And that sultan's first act was to order the execution of all his brothers. Historians still argue whether it was grief or strategy. Probably both. Probably neither. You learn that the Ottoman Empire, at its height, implemented fratricide not as punishment, but policy. The moment a new sultan ascended, his brothers were often quietly suffocated with silk cords. A cleaner death, bloodless, almost ceremonial. The justification? Unity, peace, a throne without rivals. The cost? Childhoods built on ticking clocks. The valid sultan, remember her? The sultan's mother, the hidden architect of power. She often chose which concubine was allowed to bear children, and which ones were fed special herbs in their tea, not poison, just enough to prevent fertility. Just enough to keep them desirable, but not dangerous. There's a cabinet in this room, lined with little clay bottles. No labels, no instructions. You pick one up. It smells like mint and something bitter, like crushed regret. The eunuch guiding you, old, stooped, eyes like glass, says nothing. But he watches you like he's weighing whether you can be trusted. With this truth, you ask him if love ever factored into the line of succession. He laughs, a dry rasp that sounds like paper being torn. Love, he says, love doesn't write history. Blood does. And then he tells you the story of Selim, the quiet, a prince raised in shadow, never favored, never chosen. But one night, a concubine who wasn't supposed to be in his chamber came to him. She wasn't beautiful. Not in the traditional sense, but she was kind. She listened. She touched his hand and didn't flinch. 9 months later, she gave birth to a boy with eyes like his. And for the first time, Selim was noticed. He was summoned to court, dressed properly, photographed. And when the Sultan died unexpectedly, it wasn't the favored prince who ascended. It was Selim, because in the empire of blood, one child, one accident of affection could alter the path of 1,000 deaths. You think again of Mustafa, the boy with the turtle drawing. What future awaits him? Will he be the favorite who lives long enough to die old? Or the threat who doesn't wake one morning? It all depends on whose affection carries weight when the final decision is made. You see a name scratched out furiously in one record, the ink torn into the parchment. No one will tell you who she was. But later, you find a scrap of silk ribbon in a nearby drawer, faded green, smelling faintly of cedar and lemon. Someone wore that once, probably on the day she believed she would be remembered. You ask the eunuch what happens to the children who are born but not wanted. He doesn't blink. If they're girls, they're trained. If they're boys, they're hidden. You press further. And if they're too many, he looks past you into some middle distance only he can see. Then they're corrected. That night, you sit alone in a garden no one visits, watching the palace lights flicker like fireflies. You think of the mothers who risked everything to place their sons closer to the throne. Of the women who drank bitter herbs with a smile, hoping to be chosen next time. Of the eunuchs who held the silk cords with shaking hands. And of the scrolls silent, heavy, waiting to tell their truths to anyone foolish enough to look too closely. You run your hand over a scroll labeled only the quiet ones. It doesn't open easily. Some stories aren't meant to. But you open it anyway. Because tonight, you understand what the garden of affection really cultivates. Not roses. Not lovers. Not even heirs. It cultivates silence, beautiful, decorated, deadly. And in that silence, you finally hear the echo of every name that was almost remembered. There's laughter coming from behind the lattice windows, the kind that spills out in quick bursts and then quickly hushes, like it's afraid of being caught. It's not seductive or polite, it's belly deep, unfiltered, and contagious. You follow the sound to a low, sun-drenched terrace at the far end of the garden, the part the architects must have forgotten to make symmetrical, where the floors are uneven and the vines grow a little too wild. This isn't a place for politics or performances. This is where mischief lives. And somehow, it feels more alive than any of the grand halls you've passed. You're not alone. The terrace is full of concubines lounging on cushions with pomegranate juice dripping from their fingers and clay masks drying on their cheeks. Their slippers are off. Their veils are loose. They are not playing their roles. They're playing themselves. At least, as much as they're allowed to. One girl named Jasmine is attempting to balance a spoon on her nose, while another counts how many dried apricots she can toss into her own mouth without missing. There are no eunuchs here, no chaperones, just the garden at its most human. It's jarring at first, like seeing your teacher laugh at a joke you made by accident. But then it's comforting. Because affection in the palace isn't always strategic. Sometimes, it's just a shared joke about how terrible the dates are this season. You sit among them, and someone hands you a bowl of cold melon. A girl named Layla asks if you can sing. You say no, so they make you anyway. Your voice cracks. They laugh not unkindly. One claps. Another starts humming along off-key on purpose. It's ridiculous. It's pure. It's joy, uncurated. For a moment, you forget where you are. Then, just as quickly you remember. Because the laughter is cut short by the sharp clang of a servant dropping a tray somewhere nearby. Everyone freezes just for a beat. And then resumes, a little quieter, a little more aware. Because joy is always being timed in this place. You notice the little ways they take it back. A shared storybook hidden under floorboards. A comb passed around like a scepter. One girl mimics the Sultan's walk, slightly hunched, one hand on his beard, the other gesturing like he's blessing a particularly well-cooked eggplant. The impression is flawless. They cackle. That's when Nisa arrives. Not loud, not flashy, but her entrance quiets the room. She's older, not in years but in eyes, and she wears her robe like armor. She's known, not because she's favored by the Sultan, she isn't, but because she survived 3 poisonings, 2 scandals, and 1 near exile. Her nickname is the Cat. Not because she's graceful, but because she always lands. Nisa sits beside you and peels an orange with surgical precision. You know what the hardest part is? She says, handing you a slice. It's not the waiting, it's pretending that you're not. You ask her how she keeps her mind in this place. I tell jokes, she says. Terrible ones. Want to hear one? You nod. She leans in. Why don't eunuchs play cards? You shrug. Because they hate dealing. You groan. She grins. Told you. Terrible, but it works. The tension dissolves. One girl giggles. So hard she snorts. They're not just surviving here. They're building something. A kind of sub-society, an undercurrent. The garden's unofficial emotional plumbing system. Later, you discover their secret, a ledger hidden behind a loose stone on the terrace wall. Not of favors or rankings, but of moments. Each girl has a page, not with her name, but a symbol she chose, a pear, a feather, a star, and under each, a list of memories. Cried laughing over burnt halva. Taught Sarah to braid hair like waves. Watched the moon from the roof tiles until my nose went numb. These are not the moments the Sultan cares about, but they are the ones that matter. You flip to Nisa's page. Her symbol is a broken pomegranate. Her latest entry reads, told a joke so bad even the shadows chuckled. You add one for yourself, with their permission. You choose a fig as your symbol. You write, sang badly. Got applauded like a queen. That's when they tell you about the hidden feast. Once a season, usually on a moonless night, they sneak into the old laundry room, the one no one uses. Since the new steam system was installed, and throw a banquet with stolen food and improvised wine made from fermented grapes and syrup. No eunuchs, no hierarchy. Everyone wears ridiculous makeshift crowns made of ribbon and spoon handles. They dance. They eat too much. They name each other with titles like Queen of Clumsiness and Mistress of Smells. The last Queen of Laughter was Sophie. You smile. She deserves that crown. They show you the archive, drawings of each feast, kept hidden in the base of a broken water pitcher. Scribbles of girls with crooked tiaras and exaggerated eyelashes, surrounded by bread and nonsense. One sketch shows someone mid-fall with the caption, "This is when Zainab thought she could juggle." These drawings are rough, childlike, but they pulse with life. They are the opposite of the sterile portraits that line the harem walls, those painted women who never blink. The hidden feast is not about escape. It's about reclaiming the space between fear and duty. About affection, not offered upward to the throne, but sideways to each other. You ask if the Sultan knows. They shake their heads. Even if he does, he won't understand, Nisa says. He doesn't know what it's like to be loved for your worst jokes. That night, you watch the terrace empty, the girls slipping back into their roles like actors putting on old costumes. The laughter fades, the slippers return, the veils rise. But the mischief lingers, stitched into the uneven tiles and the half-dried clay masks. Somewhere in the garden, a girl is practicing her wink. Another is rewriting a lullaby to make it absurd. And under a loose stone, the ledger waits for its next memory. You walk away with a slice of orange still sweet on your tongue, and the certainty that affection, when freely given, leaves the loudest echoes. Someone has slipped a book under your door. No title, no name. Just velvet binding and a scent like old sandalwood and secrets. When you open it, your breath catches. This isn't a prayer book or a genealogy scroll. It's something far rarer. Something dangerous. This is one of the forbidden books of the garden, passed hand to trembling hand, read only by lamplight, and hidden inside pillows in pomegranate crates. It's erotic. Not crude, not lewd. Erotic like flame, intimate, flickering, and capable of reducing empires to ash. The first page is a drawing, not of bodies, but of eyes, pairs of them, lined up like stars across a dark page, each one detailed enough to look real. Beneath them, a single phrase written in fluid Persian. What the eyes do not see, the skin remembers. You're in the chamber of forbidden books now. Not officially, of course. Officially, this room doesn't exist. But you're sitting in it, surrounded by cushions and quiet as Nargis, yes, the calligraphy tutor who never raises her voice, opens a secret compartment in the wall and begins to pull out volumes. Some are scrolls, some stitched in silk, some mere fragments of parchment. None of them belong in the official palace library. These, she whispers, are the books that teach you how to feel. You glance at a page inked centuries ago. Maybe in Cairo, maybe in Delhi, maybe in a quiet room not unlike this one. It shows a diagram of intertwined hands, annotated with soft notes on pressure points, emotional resonance, and spiritual connection. Another page details the sequence of scent layering, how certain perfumes, applied in precise order, can open the senses or close them entirely. This is science, art, and rebellion. We're not supposed to have these, Nargis adds. But then again, we're not supposed to want anything we weren't told to want. She hands you a worn volume, with no cover. Inside, a poem begins. Touch me not with your hand but with your thought, for flesh forgets but longing writes in salt. You don't know whether to blush or applaud. Historians still argue whether these texts were smuggled in by courtiers, traded by foreign consorts, or copied from memory by a girl who'd read them once in a dream. Some say they were taught in secret for generations, even as imams condemned them. Others insist they're fabrications, romantic myths wrapped in gold thread. But here, in this room, under this lamplight, you know they're real. Because the air tingles with the kind of honesty no empire can fake. Nargis tells you that the garden had a code for passing books. A concubine would request rose leaves from the laundry maid. If the leaves were still wet, it meant the book was available. If dry, the risk was too high. Sometimes the books arrived disguised, wrapped in ribbons as gifts, tucked inside coal containers, or even written on the inside of a dancing skirt's hem. There's a tale of a concubine named Elvin who had entire chapters of a Sanskrit love manual stitched into the lining of her prayer shawl. She read it only in the mirror, backwards, lips moving without sound. They say the Sultan once noticed her reciting something under her breath and asked her what it was. A prayer for patience, she lied. He smiled. She lived another 5 years and was buried with the shawl. You turn the pages and find illustrations not of people, but gestures. How to lean, how to pause, how to tilt the head so desire lingers just long enough to haunt. There's a margin note in red ink. The difference between seduction and invitation is the space between breaths. It reads like a riddle. It is a riddle. One you feel your body trying to solve, even as your mind resists. Nargis opens a scroll. That seems older than everything else. The text is written in 3 scripts, Arabic, Ottoman Turkish, and something you can't place. The title, The Spirit Between Bodies. It maps the emotional tides of physical connection, how touch can dissolve memory or summon it. One section talks about silence as foreplay. Another warns against affection given without intention. Do not touch someone's hand unless you're ready to remember their pulse. That line hits like a drumbeat. You think of the Sultan, of the concubines who entered his bed and left with bruises shaped like questions, of the ones who learned to touch without expectation. To offer pleasure like a performance and pretend. Not to notice when the curtain never rose again. You ask Nergis who wrote these. She shrugs. Women, always women. Men write rules, women write feeling. You believe her. Because only someone who's had to love quietly could invent metaphors like these. You ask if the Sultan knows about this room. She nods. Of course he does. He just doesn't know what's in it. He thinks the books are about desire. But they're really about power. The power to choose when and how to be touched. To understand what you want before someone tells you. That's the real danger. That's why they hide them. That's why they preserve them. Nergis puts away the scrolls, wraps them in a silk scarf scented with sage and clove, and tucks them back behind the wall. The room exhales. You understand. Now that affection here isn't just physical. It's intellectual. It's literary. It's political. And it's ancient. Before you leave, she gives you a single page torn from a book long destroyed. The writing is faded, the corner burned. But the line is legible. The body is a garden, but the mind is the key. You press it to your palm. The paper feels warm. Somewhere in the palace, someone is being touched without being understood. Somewhere else, a girl is memorizing a forbidden poem and dreaming of the day she write her own. And in a hidden chamber, lit by candlelight and courage, the garden keeps reading itself back to life. You're not sure what wakes you, the clink of glass, the scrape of parchment, or the faintest hum of someone reciting numbers in a language older than the empire itself. But when you rise and follow the sound, it leads you somewhere unexpected. Not to a bathhouse, not to a chamber of silks, but to a dome-lit room where the stars have been drawn on the ceiling in gold, mapped so precisely that when you stand in the center, you forget where you are. This is the Sultan's observatory, not for politics or war, but for desire. A celestial sex ed classroom, curated by men who understood that passion is a science, and by women who knew it was more than just chemistry. Your guide tonight is not a concubine, not a eunuch, but an astrologer named Simul, old and impatient, wrapped in layers of linen that smell faintly of cedar and dust. He doesn't speak at first, just hands you a scroll that unfurls across the floor. It's not a chart of planets. It's a chart of intimacy. Conjunctions of Venus and Mars, the hours when desire peaks. The phases of the moon that favor conception, softness, rebellion. This, Simul finally mutters, tapping the scroll, is how the Sultan schedules affection. You blink. You mean he chooses when to? Simul nods. Yes, but not. Based on mood, based on the stars, based on calculations older than his throne. The scroll is annotated in 3 scripts: Arabic, Greek, and something else sharper, serpentine, possibly Vedic. You realize quickly this is no simple astrology. It's a woven doctrine of physical, emotional, and spiritual resonance. You spot a passage that says, "Do not enter the chamber of silk on a waning moon unless you seek only illusion." Another reads, "When Mars opposes Venus, avoid kisses that begin with regret." Simul explains that the Sultan's tutors were taught to track not only court intrigues, but bodily cycles, seasonal shifts, and the pulse of the cosmos. Some concubines were even assigned based on planetary alignments. He once delayed intimacy for 3 weeks, Simul says, because Mercury was in retrograde. You try not to laugh. Simul does not. He continues, "One girl, her name was Saleha, was brought to him on a Thursday. Because her birth chart aligned with his in the 8th house of desire. They barely spoke, but she bore twins." Historians still debate whether this is coincidence or design. Some say the astrologers manipulated records to fit outcomes. Others believe the stars truly govern the empire's pulse. But you suspect the truth is simpler. In a place where nothing is private, only the sky felt like a secret. Simul shows you another scroll, this one inked in red and gold. It's a diagram of the body, but not anatomical, emotional. It marks zones of memory, of sorrow, of anticipation, each labeled with poetic names: the hollow of forgiveness, the bend of betrayal, the arch of delayed pleasure. This, he says, is how the concubines were trained to touch. Not just flesh, but stories. You learn that before a girl ever entered the Sultan's chamber, she was taught not only how to move, but when. Timing was everything. A misplaced caress could mean demotion. A well-placed pause could mean a chamber of her own. You read an entry from a training manual. If he turns his head to the left after a joke, do not laugh. He is remembering. Offer silence. Another: if he brushes the ring on his thumb, ask about his dreams. But only once. Never twice. This wasn't affection. This was choreography, calculated, codified, celestial. There's a moment late. Into the night, when Simo lets slip a secret. He once loved a concubine. Not in the palace, before. In his youth, in the hills beyond Bursa. She smelled of goat's milk and lavender, and she used to trace constellations on his back with a blade of grass. She said my shoulder was where Orion slept. He hasn't seen her in 40 years. But every time he calculates a conjunction, he imagines what she'd think of the numbers. That's the power of affection in this place. It doesn't die. It calcifies, and sometimes it builds observatories. You notice a book tucked into a corner, bound in black leather. Inside, the pages are not numbered. They're dated. Each entry logs a night the Sultan chose solitude over touch. 11 Safar. Dreams too heavy, asked for oud oil but no company. 3 Razab, remembered her scent, not her face. Felt guilt. Declined dessert. These are not the records of an emperor. They're the diary of a man afraid of his own desires. Simo closes the book gently. He fears what affection reveals, he says. That he's not in control, that the stars might be. Before you leave, he gives you a compass. Not for direction, for timing. If you ever wish to kiss someone, he says, wait until the moon is new and you've forgotten why you wanted to. You smile. He doesn't. The chamber fades behind you. The stars overhead now impossibly bright. Somewhere in the garden, a girl is aligning perfume bottles in planetary order. Another is tracing her pulse to see if it syncs with the hour. And the Sultan? He's staring at the night sky, wondering if the next time he reaches out, the heavens will reach back. The scent hits you before anything else. A heady blend of myrrh, burnt orange peel, and the faintest trace of musk. It seeps through the corridors like gossip, curling into the arches, softening the tiles underfoot, and telling your senses that something unusual is about to happen. It's masquerade night. Not official, not listed, not announced with trumpets or protocol. This is the Sultan's private ritual, hosted only once every few seasons, and only when he's restless enough to rewrite the rules. Tonight, names don't matter. Neither does hierarchy. The concubines become characters. The eunuchs become poets. The musicians become lovers. And the Sultan becomes invisible. That's the game. You enter the garden courtyard, transformed now into a dreamscape of lanterns strung like constellations, silks draped over fountains, and low tables piled with unmarked delicacies. Everyone is masked. Not the delicate, perfumed half-masks of court dances. These are elaborate, absurd, sometimes grotesque creations. Peacocks, lions, storm clouds, even one girl painted entirely as a tree. Her branches tipped with real jasmine blossoms. Laughter crackles through the air, not the polite, measured kind you've come to expect, but reckless, ridiculous laughter. Someone is telling fortunes with tea leaves, but in reverse, you drink the tea after you hear your future. Someone else is pretending to be a scribe from Venice, spouting nonsense in broken Italian and being wooed by 3 girls who insist they are princesses from lost cities. It's chaos. It's freedom. It's theater. And somewhere in this swarm of character and color is the Sultan himself, masked, silent, watching, maybe dancing, maybe already whispering into someone's ear. That's the thrill of it, no one knows. But everyone tries to guess. The girl in the fox mask brushes past you and says, "If he touches your wrist, don't look surprised." The boy dressed as a skeleton spins in circles near the fountain, chanting verses from a love poem with the wrong rhythm, on purpose. You feel the tension unwind from the usual rhythm of power. Tonight, affection isn't distributed by rank. It's earned by mystery, by improvisation. You hear of one concubine who once wore no mask at all, just a thick black veil and a single. Words stitched onto her back, nobody. She was courted all night. The Sultan gave her a single pomegranate as a token. She bit it in half and walked away. She was summoned a week later to become a private advisor. Historians don't know her name. She never signed anything. But they say the scent of pomegranate still clings to the curtains of the Sultan's study. You're offered a mask, a delicate serpent, made of bronze and velvet. You hesitate, then slide it on. Everything shifts. The world sharpens. Colors saturate. Every glance now becomes loaded. You're no longer a guest. You're a player. Masked woman in a deer mask dances near the marble stairs, her movements exaggerated and angular. She tells you she used to be the Sultan's favorite, but only in dreams, she adds with a wink. You ask her what that means. Some nights he dreams me. Other nights he dreams about not dreaming me. Both are dangerous. She disappears before you can respond. Another girl, dressed like a comet with silver threads trailing from her sleeves, is singing a song in a language no one recognizes. You ask her what it is. It's made up, she says. But he always leans in when he hears it. She winks. Because he thinks it might be something he forgot. You realize now this. Night is not about indulgence. It's about forgetting the system long enough to feel something unscripted. And yet, even here, strategy pulses beneath the perfume. A girl dressed as a mirror flirts without speaking, mimicking each person she dances with. Another wears a mask of tears and tells jokes so dark you laugh out of reflex, then feel guilty for hours. They're all playing, but they're playing to win. You spot a figure in plain robes, wearing a mask of bone. No adornment, no gesture. He simply watches. Everyone gives him space. He could be a servant. He could be the Sultan. He could be a test. That's the fun and the terror. One story floats through the crowd of a girl who once slapped a masked man thinking he was a rival concubine in disguise. It turned out to be the Sultan. He laughed, promoted her, then never spoke to her again. Another time, a eunuch dressed as a musician composed a song that made the Sultan weep. He was exiled the next day. Too close, someone says. Too sharp. You wander through the crowd and find yourself seated beside a woman painted entirely gold. She doesn't speak, just hands you a small slip of paper. On it, not every affection needs a name. You look up, but she's already gone. The paper smells like cloves. Later, you hear that anyone who receives a message at the masquerade is being watched. Maybe by the Sultan, maybe by his mother, maybe by someone who used to love you. You ask an older concubine, dressed tonight as a fortune teller with coins in her hair, what the masquerade really means. She smiles, pulls a fig from her pocket, and says, "It means we all remember who we could have been if no one had written our names down." The night deepens. The wine turns to sherbet. The music slows. One by one, the players retreat, their masks damp with sweat and secrets. At the very end, you stand alone at the fountain. The water glows with floating candles. One of them flickers and dies. A figure approaches behind you. You feel his presence before you hear it. No words, just a hand gently resting on your shoulder. You don't turn. You don't speak. Because sometimes, affection in the garden isn't about possession or performance. Sometimes it's just about being seen. And knowing that for one night, at least, your face didn't need to matter. Only your mystery. There's a pillow on the Sultan's bed embroidered with gold thread that spells out the phrase, "Sleep is a negotiation." You don't notice it at first, not until the light hits it just right, and the letters shimmer like a dare. You're standing at the edge of the royal chamber, now not as a voyeur, but as a witness, watching the place where desire turns into diplomacy. This is not a bedroom, it's a battlefield. The silks here are ironed flat like treaties, the incense burned. Not for romance, but to control the scent memory of power. Because tonight, you're about to see how empires aren't always built in council chambers. They're built on mattresses, between sighs, under veils. Welcome to the realm of pillow diplomacy. The Sultan doesn't summon favorites at random. Every choice is calculated. Tonight, he calls for Nadia. You've seen her before, quiet, slow blinking, almost forgettable until she speaks. Then the room reshapes itself. Her voice is low and deliberate, like each syllable is a chess move. Nadia isn't just beautiful. She's strategic affection personified. Her presence has tilted 3 alliances, soft 1 rebellion, and delayed a war by at least a month, all without raising her voice. She enters barefoot, wearing a robe the color of overripe figs, and bows lower than necessary. A signal. She knows the stakes. The Sultan gestures. She sits not beside him, but across from him, angled slightly to the left. That, too, is a signal. She's offering perspective, not submission. A eunuch pours sherbet, rose, and lemon. She doesn't drink. Another signal. She waits for him to drink first. He does, and the game begins. They don't talk politics, not directly. He tells her about a dream he had his ship sinking in a sea of milk. She asks if the milk was warm or cold. He says nothing. She smiles. She knows cold milk means anxiety, warm milk means desire. That answer tells her everything about the Ottoman-Venetian trade tensions without a single mention of silk roots. This is the language of the pillow. Metaphor layered over body heat, gestures disguised as flirtation. The Sultan touches her wrist. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she tells him a story of a queen who defeated her enemies by pretending to love them one by one until they drowned in their own expectations. He laughs, maybe too hard, maybe not enough. The night thickens. Nadia leans in. She says something about the sea again, but this time, she's talking about herself. "I rise only for the moon," she whispers. You don't need to be in the room to understand what she's offering. Information in exchange for intimacy. Affection as treaty. Her touch, a signature. Historians still argue how much influence the Sultan's favorites actually wielded. Some claim they were merely ornaments, skilled only in flattery. Others point to letters, intercepted and stained with wax, where entire provinces were discussed through the lens of what perfume a girl wore that night. There's one letter from the Crimean Khan begging the Sultan to consult the lady in green before deciding. No one knows which concubine that was. But the green robe still exists in a drawer in the palace's clothing archives, its hem frayed from pacing. Nadia wasn't the only one. A decade earlier, there was Roxana, who once delayed an invasion by suggesting the Sultan might look weak if he appeared too eager. Desire, she said, must always be matched by resistance. She was never officially credited. But the campaign was postponed, and 3 new bathhouses were built in her honor. You hear the story of a concubine who once seduced an ambassador during a banquet, never touched him, never spoke, just made sure he caught her eye at timed intervals, adjusted her earrings 3 times, and then left the room. He left the next morning with a softer treaty in hand. When asked what changed his mind, he said, "I dreamt of restraint." He wasn't lying. Because affection in the garden was never just physical. It was psychological theater. Every sigh, every silence, every refusal meticulously placed like punctuation in a sentence too dangerous to speak aloud. Even the eunuchs played their part. They would deliver scents to the Sultan's chambers: lavender for openness, jasmine for persuasion, myrrh for defiance. The concubine would walk in already carrying a message on her skin. Nadia knows this. She leans forward now, her voice barely above a hum, and asks, "Have you decided what to do about the envoy?" He doesn't answer, but he places a fig on her plate. That's a yes, or a maybe, or a test. She smiles, doesn't eat it. She's not hungry, not for fruit, not for praise. She's here for something else. The next morning, the Sultan issues a revised decree, softer, slower, deliberately vague. The kind of order that sounds like a threat, but feels like a poem. No one knows why he changed his tone. But Nadia is moved to better quarters, and a shipment of silk is rerouted. That's pillow diplomacy. You hear of another girl, Salvi, who once spoke only in riddles for an entire week. The Sultan became obsessed. He summoned her nightly, trying to decode her meanings. One night, she told him, "The wind moves because it wants to be seen." He nodded like he understood. The next day, he ordered more coastal patrols. Coincidence? Maybe, but no one ever heard Salvi speak plainly again. Somewhere in the garden, a girl is practicing the art of refusal, not harsh, not cold, just slow enough to be misinterpreted. Another is studying the Sultan's handwriting, learning where his pressure lightens when he's uncertain. And the Sultan? He lies on embroidered pillows, wondering if the next touch will bring loyalty or revolution disguised as a kiss. The story begins, as it always does in this palace, with a whisper, but this one has teeth. It slides through the arches, past embroidered drapes and sleeping bodies, through chambers thick with lavender and power, and lands like a dagger at the feet of the valid Sultan. Her name is Koksem, and she does not flinch. If the Sultan is the sun of this empire, then Koksem is its moon, quiet, silver, ever-present, and far more dangerous in the dark. You meet her not in the throne room, not in a banquet, but alone, in a garden where the olive trees bend toward her like supplicants. She's feeding pigeons with seeds dyed blue to match her robes. When she speaks, her voice is soft, but it lands like thunder. "The garden belongs to me," she says. "Not because I rule it, but because I remember everything it tried to forget." Koksem did not begin in silk. She began in shadows. Taken as a gift from the Greek islands, renamed, remade, and placed in the harem like a coin tossed into a well. And like most coins, she sank, but she watched, she learned. When other girls bathed in rosewater and rehearsed dances, she memorized the faces of the viziers. When they braided their hair for the Sultan, she braided alliances. Her affection was never loud. It was cold fire, slow and deliberate. She was not the most beautiful, but she never needed to be. She knew that the most dangerous woman in the Endel garden wasn't the one who was loved, was the one who could make herself essential. Her rise began with a letter. Not one she wrote, one she intercepted. It was a message from a foreign envoy to a concubine promising escape, influence, and exile. Koksem delivered the letter herself to the Sultan. Not out of loyalty, but as a warning. "Even your softness is spied upon," she told him. That night, the girl vanished. Koksem stayed. And the Sultan never summoned her again, not as a lover, but as something more unsettling. As a mind he couldn't afford to ignore. The harem changed after that. Girls who once vied for dresses began requesting books. The whisper network that once traded in perfume recipes now traded in foreign policy rumors. Kossem's influence grew so subtly that when the Sultan died, half the court assumed she would fade. But they had misunderstood her completely. Because Koksem didn't need a throne, she needed access. And now, as valid Sultan, she had it all. She oversaw appointments, rewrote schedules, altered the menu to observe which dishes made men talk more. She allowed two rivals to accidentally meet during a garden stroll 1 week later. Their territories merged. She replaced the Sultan's chief food taster with a eunuch who owed her his life. She even dictated what lullabies the concubines sang, believing that affection begins with music. Historians still debate how much of the empire's stability during her regency was due to her influence. Some argue she simply filled a power vacuum. Others claim she orchestrated that vacuum herself. You begin to understand that affection, when wielded properly, is more potent than decree. Cakesum mastered it, not in her gaze, in her timing. She would praise a concubine only after the Sultan ignored her. She would offer tea to a eunuch just before he was asked to deliver a difficult message, and she never repeated herself. Her most powerful weapon was unpredictability, but even she had shadows. One of her sons tried to rebel. Another trusted his wife too openly. Cakesum responded with silence, then with action. Quiet reassignment, gentle disappearance. In one case, a handwritten poem left on a pillow. If you must choose between blood and breath, choose breath. You can always replace blood. It wasn't signed, but everyone knew. You hear the tale of how she once resolved a palace feud between two powerful factions, not with threats, but with dinner. She invited both sides to a feast, served dishes from both their homelands, let them talk, gave no speeches, just smiled. By the end of the night, both leaders had agreed to a compromise neither of them had considered before. Cakesum didn't speak once, but she had chosen the wine. She knew who would talk more after the second glass. You ask her, now seated under a fig tree with a falcon perched beside her, if she ever regretted not being just a mother. She smirks. I was a mother to a nation, she says. What more do they want? You think of all the concubines you've seen, dreaming of affection as a ladder. Cakesum turned it into scaffolding. She didn't climb. She rebuilt. Even now, she remains unreadable. She once survived a poisoning attempt by switching cups mid-sentence, without missing a word. Another time, she ended a coup by sitting silently in the throne room, daring anyone to drag her out. No one did. And when asked later how she knew it would work, she replied, "Because fear is loyal to stillness." That's the real secret of the garden's shadow empress. She knew when to be adored, when to be feared, and when to be both. Before you leave, she hands you a pin shaped like a crescent moon. Wear it, she says. It won't protect you, but it might remind you that affection, when remembered properly, leaves no bruises, only echoes. You walk away knowing that she has not just survived the garden. She has become its most permanent fixture. A woman who ruled through whispers, left no fingerprints, and yet still has the entire palace breathing her name like a prayer. They're not sure is safe to speak aloud. The pavilion sits tucked behind a curtain of vines so thick they look painted, draped from a trellis that was once carved with the names of every flower the Sultan's mother could remember. Time has chipped most of those names away, but the scent of the place remains sickly sweet with roses, heavy with fig leaves, and faintly medicinal, like a perfume trying to cover up something more ancient. Tonight, you enter the private retreat, known only to a few as the Dreaming Pavilion. Not because sleep happens here, though it does, but because reality forgets to follow you in. It's the one corner of the palace where affection isn't required to dress itself in reason. No strategy, no lineage. Just fantasy, curated like an exhibit. The Sultan arrives hours after sunset, not in robes, not with guards. He walks alone, barefoot, carrying a small pouch of crushed opium wrapped in embroidered silk. No one speaks when he enters. A concubine already waits for him. Her name, if you dare to ask, is Aylin, but she's gone by many. She used to be a dancer. Now she's something else, a listener, a dream brewer, a cartographer of hallucinations. She lights a candle that doesn't smell like anything you can name. Maybe resin, maybe memory. The flame is blue. That's how. You know tonight won't be quiet. The air thickens. Pillows are arranged. Curtains are drawn. The music begins, not performed, but played on a reed pipe that seems to come from the walls themselves, slow and soft and winding like breath. The Sultan reclines. Aylin kneels beside him, places a cold cloth on his forehead, and begins to speak not to him, but around him. Her words aren't instructions, they're invitations. You are no longer Sultan, she whispers. You are a fisherman's son who kissed a girl in a pomegranate orchard and woke up with a crown in his hands. He exhales, the pouch loosened in his fingers. He doesn't need it yet. Her voice is enough for now. This is how it works. She guides him, not into sleep, into stories. Sometimes he becomes a soldier, sometimes a bird. Once he became a tree that watched its lovers carve their names into its bark. That night he wept and refused to speak for 2 days. Historians don't write about this. They don't mention the pavilion. They note the absences, those quiet days when decrees were delayed, when concubines waited in full dress for a man who never summoned them. They assume illness. They assume prayer. They never assume escape. But that's what the pavilion is. A place to forget the burden of affection and remember what it feels like to want without calculation. Aylin tells you, later, that the pavilion is older than the current dynasty. That once it was a Sufi retreat. That the first sultan to use it for pleasure wept when he heard his own name spoken without fear for the first time. He said it tasted strange, she tells you. Like a word trying to leave the mouth of someone dying. You believe her. Because there is something holy about the pavilion. Not in its design. In its unspoken agreement that here, desire is not owned. It is borrowed. The Sultan smokes, slowly, carefully. Aylin tells him a story about a merchant who traded all his wealth for a single dream. Each night he visited the same meadow. Each morning he forgot. Until one day, he stopped waking up. She doesn't explain the ending. She doesn't need to. The Sultan's eyes flutter. The pipe still hums. She hums with it. And when the dream finally overtakes him, her hands do not wander. They hover. They adjust pillows. They press on pressure points designed to quiet grief stored in the shoulders. She learned that from an old concubine named Maryam, who claimed to have studied massage. In Alexandria, Maryam vanished long ago, but her hands remain, passed down like spells. Aylin confesses that she once loved the Sultan, briefly, before she learned that he only dreams of women he fears. That to be loved by him is to be turned into metaphor. So now she stays in the margins, not a lover, not a servant, just the voice. That builds his escape. She remembers every fantasy he's ever murmured in sleep. The garden with silver frogs. The river that smells like cinnamon. The horse that talks but only to women. One night, she says, he dreamt he was a girl in the harem. Trapped, longing, beautiful. He cried so quietly, I thought it was the pipe leaking, she says. When he woke up, he didn't look at me for 3 days. That's the secret she won't write down. That the most powerful man in the empire sometimes dreams himself powerless. And in those dreams, he's kind. But only there. You ask her if he ever asks what she dreams. She laughs. Of course not. My dreams aren't imperial. Property. And yet, you suspect she weaves her own truths into his fantasies. Small touches. A song her mother sang. A fruit he's never tasted, but now suddenly craves. A color he can't name but starts requesting in drapery. Affection, she says, is a drug far stronger than opium. But you have to dose it slowly, or he'll wake up. Outside, the garden is silent. The guards have long since stopped patrolling this wing. The only sound is the reed pipe, fading now, replaced by the soft rhythm of breath and the occasional rustle of silk. The pavilion sleeps, not deeply, but willingly. And in that sleep, affection becomes something purer than politics, more fragile than perfume, something that lives only in the brief space between inhale and dream. You step out just as the sun begins to press gently against the garden walls. Somewhere inside, the Sultan dreams of a river with no name. And Aylin, who once gave him her real name and watched him forget it, smiles in the fading blue light and prepares another story. It starts with smoke, not incense, not perfume, but the thick, bitter scent of real fire. You smell it before the guards do, before the eunuchs race through the inner halls, shouting instructions with ash already clinging to their robes. And then it spreads, fast, like fury given form. The garden is burning, not in metaphor, not in rumor. In real, rising flames that dance along velvet drapes and devour silken cushions like they've been waiting for this moment. You push through. The chaos, through concubines clutching heirlooms, through bathhouse girls carrying birds in cages and books pressed to their chests. One girl sobs because she can't find her shoes. Another because she left her poem half finished. There's no plan. There's no protocol for when affection combusts. And yet, somehow no one screams. That's the strange thing. It's not panic that fills the air, it's disbelief. As if no one truly believed this place could ever be touched by something so crude as flame. Because the garden always felt eternal. Untouchable, suspended in its own scented logic. But now the walls are spitting smoke and the tiles are cracking under heat. And suddenly, everything that made this place beautiful is what's feeding the fire. The silk, the lacquer, the perfumed oils, the forbidden books with dried flower bookmarks, fuel. You pass the aviary just in time to see the parrots released green and gold flashes against a sky that shouldn't be this bright. Someone has turned the moon orange. Someone, somewhere, is laughing. You hope it's not the Sultan. But part of you knows it is. Because deep inside, he must have known this was coming. That anything built on secrets and seduction eventually burns. You hear the rumor even before the flames reach the red pavilion. It was arson. No accident. Not a candle tipped, not a pipe left smoldering. This was orchestrated. A message. Maybe from a concubine long ignored. Maybe from a prince never born. Maybe from Coxim herself, staging one final act of power before history begins to edit her out. You find Nadia, her robes blackened, her expression calm. She's organizing the girls into lines, instructing them to carry water from the old cistern, shouting in 3 languages. You ask her why she's not running. She looks at you like you've missed the point entirely. Because someone has to remember the right version, she says. History loves a fire, but it forgets who stood closest to it. You turn a corner and nearly stumble over a chest of fabrics now melted into a single gleaming mass gold. Thread warped into something monstrous, beautiful in its ruin. Behind it, the chamber of perfumers is gone. Gone. Bottles shattered. Oils boiling into air so thick it makes you gag. The scent of affection, of curated seduction, now smells like morning. Aylin appears from the smoke, dragging a reed pipe behind her like a broken wing. Her eyes are red, her voice hoarse. The dreaming pavilion's gone, she says. He wasn't there. You don't ask who she means. Because the only person she could mean is the Sultan. And if he wasn't there, then where is he? Some say he fled through the east gate. Others claim he locked himself in the library. One girl insists she saw him throwing pages into the fire, one by one. You find no proof. Only echoes. Only the burned edge of a poem that begins, "If this room forgets me, let the smoke carry my name." The eunuchs are drenched in sweat and soot. One limps past you with a caged monkey in his arms. Another pulls a tapestry from the flames and coughs blood into his sleeve. The hierarchy dissolves. Tonight, there are no favorites. No games, no gold stars. Just ash. You pass the chamber where the forbidden books were kept. The wall has collapsed. Pages swirl through the air like dying moths. You catch one barely readable, edges singed, but the ink holds. It reads, "The garden you burned to forget will bloom again in someone else's mouth." You tuck it into your robe, not out of hope, out of duty. Because someone has to carry the story forward. You find Ruya kneeling in what used to be the selection room, tracing a circle in the ash. "This was where I danced," she says. "Where he blinked too slowly. Where I thought everything would change." Her hands are blackened. Her voice is too calm. You kneel beside her. She hands you a shard of mirror. "Keep this," she says. "It saw everything." The fire reaches the Valid's quarters last. You see Kheosum standing there, flanked by eunuchs, watching the flames. She doesn't try to stop it. She doesn't cry. She just watches, her hands folded like a widow at a funeral. "It's time," she says, to no one in particular. You don't know if she means time to rebuild or time to end. She disappears into the smoke. No one sees her after that. The next day, the palace is quiet. The fire has been subdued. The damage is both specific and symbolic, certain wings gone entirely, others untouched. As if the flames were selective. Intentional. The garden of affection still exists. But it's limping. The birds have flown. The perfumes have boiled away. The scrolls are ash. And the Sultan? No one is quite sure. Some say he wandered into the Bosphorus, eyes open. Others claim he boarded a ship dressed as a servant. One concubine says she found a note on her pillow. "I dreamed a garden. I woke in a fire." The survivors gather in the terrace. Nisa counts the names of those missing like rosary beads. Zainab recites poetry from memory because the paper is gone. Even Daria, who once swore she'd never cry, now does so quietly, her tears streaking lines through the soot on her cheeks. And you sit with the last page of the forbidden book clutched in your hands, the words trembling, the ink still. Legible. If affection is a palace, then loss is its only door. You exhale. The air still tastes like roses and ruin. But you're still here. And the garden, for all its ash and ache, still whispers. It's quiet, now not the kind of silence that follows a lullaby, but the heavy, humming stillness that wraps around ruins. You walk through the garden at dawn, and everything smells like memory, charred jasmine, cooled ash, and something else, something soft and metallic, like a coin dropped in deep water. The birds haven't returned. The fountains are dry. But there's laughter still echoing, faint and unplaceable, like someone's telling a joke from behind a locked door. The garden isn't gone. It's changed. You're not alone. The survivors move differently now. No more performance, no more ritual. They walk with the knowledge that the curtain was pulled back, and what stood behind it wasn't a sultan's glory, or a concubine's power, or a dynasty's perfection. It was longing, raw, unresolved, still lingering like smoke and silk. You find a cracked mirror near the practice chamber. Someone's written on it with coal. "We were more than the role." You don't know who wrote it. You don't need to. The message is everywhere now. In the way the girls braid each other's hair without rush. In how they sit together without waiting to be summoned. In the way they speak to the eunuchs softly. Like equals, even the walls seem to breathe differently. The fire didn't destroy the garden. It just peeled it open. Like a pomegranate split to reveal what was always inside. Not perfection, not obedience, but defiance dressed in beauty. You pass the remains of the perfumery. Zainab is there, sweeping broken glass with her bare hands. "It smells better now," she says. She means it. The cloying layers are gone. What's left is the scent of earth, sweat, and rose stems. The root, not the bloom. You see Ruya teaching a dance step to a younger girl. Not for performance, but because it feels good to move. You see Nisa sketching the fire, not as a disaster, but as an anatomy, each flame shaped like a name she refuses to let disappear. Someone has begun to rebuild the terrace. Not as it was, but freer. No more lattice, just open air. Someone else is painting tulips on the walls again. This time with thorns. And the Sultan? No one says his name anymore. Not out of fear. Out of irrelevance. He was never the heart of this place. The women were. The longing was. The stories. You visit the chamber of books again. Most are gone. But tucked beneath a floorboard, you find a single volume wrapped in waxcloth. You open it slowly. It's handwritten, anonymous, titled only Echoes. Inside, pages filled with stories that sound familiar, but feel older. A concubine who built her own vocabulary. A eunuch who rewrote lullabies into maps. A dancer who trained her feet to speak. This isn't history. This is preservation. The garden rewriting itself. There's a line in the back. When the empire ends, let our laughter remain carved in its marble. And it does. You hear it again. A giggle behind the old aviary. A snort near the bathhouse ruins. The kind of laughter that needs no audience. Just memory. You think back to the girls you met. Gulbahar's amused bitterness. Aten's quiet rebellion. Safi's refusal to fade. Aylin's dreamscapes. Nadia's negotiations. Kaun's orchestration. They weren't chapters in a sultan's tale. They were the authors. And you, the listener. The witness. Before you leave, you return to the fountain where you once saw tears fall silently into moonlight. The water runs again clear, slow, deliberate. Someone has placed a single fig beside it. No note, just a gesture. Maybe an offering, maybe a beginning. You dip your fingers in the water. It's cold, honest. You whisper the final line you remember from the Forbidden's book. If affection is the root, then memory is the bloom. You look around one last time. The garden doesn't wink, doesn't beckon. It simply waits, like it always has, for the next name, the next story, the next dream. The light now filters gently through open latticework where shadows once clung too tightly. The air has cooled, and the voices have softened, faded into the hush of walls that have seen too much and still hold every story like breath. You sit where the marble is still warm from the sun, where flowers have begun to grow back through cracks not as weeds, but as survivors. There is no music now, only the steady rhythm of things learning how to be again. Let yourself rest. Let the echoes drift further from your chest. You've heard their names. You've walked their corridors. You've touched the ribboned edges of their longing. And now, you leave not as a guest, but as someone who knows. The garden is quieter now, but it will never be silent. Not really. Close your eyes, let the smoke rise, let the names go. They'll find you again in dreams. They always do. End of script. Sweet dreams.